At midnight, the lock snapped like a bone. My stepfather crashed through the door, eyes wild, fists flying. But what shattered me wasn't his rage. It was my mother, watching silently behind him. She didn't scream. She didn't stop him. She didn't choose me. In that moment, as I lay bleeding on the floor of my army quarters, I understood. War doesn't always come in camouflage. Sometimes it wears your family's face. My name is Claire Morgan, and tonight I stopped waiting for someone to save me, because survival isn't given, it's taken by force if necessary. The first blow landed before I could scream. My body slammed against the edge of the bookshelf, spine first, and the world blinked white with pain. I heard the crack before I felt it, my shoulder popping out of place, ribs bending where they shouldn't. My knees buckled, but he wasn't done. Thomas Grayson, my stepfather, my monster, loomed above me like a storm. Whiskey clung to his breath, hot and sour, as his voice ripped through the room. "You ungrateful little traitor." The room spun as he grabbed a fist full of my hair and yanked me upright. My vision swam, but what I saw froze my blood more than the blows ever could. My mother, Evelyn, stood in the hallway. She clutched her shawl tight across her chest, like it could shield her from reality. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembled, but she didn't move, didn't cry out, didn't scream for him to stop. She just watched. It was that silence that shattered something inside me. This wasn't a stranger hurting me. This was family. And the woman who birthed me, who used to hum lullabies as I fell asleep, stood still as stone. A ghost of the mother I once knew. Thomas snarled and slammed me into the wall again, and this time my breath fled my lungs. I tasted blood. My cheek burned where his knuckles had landed, the sting, hot and immediate. My shoulder screamed in its socket. I tried to fight back. God, I did, but he was twice my size and driven by rage that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with control. "You think the army makes you strong?" he spat. "You'll always be mine. You don't leave this family without paying the price." My hands scrabbled against the floor, searching for anything to use, to crawl, to hold on to. And then I saw it. The olive green radio, military issue, compact, rugged. I'd brought it back from base last week after a night shift, too tired to return it. It lay just out of reach beneath the desk. My ribs screamed with every inch as I dragged myself across the floor. Thomas kicked me hard in the back, but my fingers found the edge of the radio. My thumb slammed the emergency beacon switch. 3 rapid presses. A silent pulse shot through the air, transmitting my coordinates to the base military police. He didn't notice. He was too consumed, pacing, raving, unravelling in real time. His voice was a distorted blur now, accusations, curses, warnings. But my focus had narrowed to one thing: survival. I curled into myself, trying to shield vital organs as best I could. My body burned in too many places to count, but under the chaos I heard it, a soft crackle, the hiss of static. A faint voice returning over the radio. Hope slid through me like a spark on dry kindling. Thomas reached down to grab me again, but I twisted just enough that his grip slipped. I screamed, more from defiance than pain. Somewhere deep inside, rage replaced fear, not enough to win, but enough to last until help arrived. And then came the sound that made him freeze. Heavy boots outside. Thomas turned toward the door just as it burst open. This time, not from him, but from uniformed MPs, guns drawn, voices sharp and commanding. "Step away from her!" Everything after that blurred. He roared, tried to fight. They tackled him, cuffed him, hauled him out cursing, spitting, his rage uncontained. And Evelyn? She still hadn't moved. She stood there, clutching that same shawl, her face blank. And as they dragged him past, she whispered, not to him, not to me, but to the floor. He didn't mean it. That sentence was a bullet. Clean, precise, fatal. She'd chosen, and it wasn't me. Pain has a way of ripping open the past. As the sirens wailed and Thomas's voice faded into the distance, my mind betrayed me. It didn't stay in the now, not with the sting of broken ribs or the taste of blood on my tongue. It drifted backward to a time before bruises, before silence. A time when I still believed a home could be safe. I was 8 years old when my father died, Lieutenant James Morgan, Navy vet, the kind of man who kept his boots polished even on weekends and taught me how to fold a flag before I learned to tie my shoes. He wasn't loud or stern, not like most military fathers. He had this soft patience about him, like he believed I could conquer anything as long as I was allowed to fail a few times first. I remember one rainy afternoon. We were on the carpet and he was helping me learn the national anthem for school. I kept messing up the words. He never laughed, just smiled, started over again and again until I got it right. When I did, he saluted me like I was already a soldier. That was the last memory I have of him alive. A heart attack took him in the middle of a night shift. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. The house changed immediately. It wasn't just the absence of his laugh or the way the rooms felt colder. It was my mother, Evelyn. She tried. I know she did. She smiled when people brought casseroles. She kissed my forehead at night. But something in her broke that day. And unlike me, she didn't try to put herself back together. She filled the silence with wine, then later with Thomas Grayson. For years I told myself she was vulnerable when he found her, that he saw her pain and slithered in like a predator, that she was prey. But I was wrong. 2 years ago, while clearing out the attic of my childhood home during leave, I found a box, yellowed, water-stained, tucked behind broken decorations and forgotten photo albums. Inside were letters, dozens of them. All from Evelyn, all addressed to Thomas. They dated back to less than 3 months after my father died. She had written the first one herself, not him, not a chance encounter at the grocery store, not some charming ex-soldier rescuing a widow. She found him. In her words, Thomas was a man who understands order, strength and discipline. She praised his military service, his leadership. She wrote about how she missed being part of something structured, respected. She missed the control my father carried, the way he made decisions, set rules, held the world steady. She didn't want a partner. She wanted power returned to the home. And she believed Thomas could deliver it. I sat on that dusty floor, holding her words, and felt the rug of my childhood ripped out from under me. All those years I thought she was stuck, that she was scared, that she stayed for me. But Evelyn had invited the wolf in. She hadn't lost herself in Thomas's shadow. She'd lit the torch that made it grow. I never told anyone about those letters, not Daniel, not Brooke, not even Lexi back in high school when she begged me to get help, because to say it out loud would make it real. It would confirm that I hadn't just lost my father, I'd lost my mother too, not to grief but to choice. The MPs had taken Thomas. I knew that much, but Evelyn, she hadn't left the hallway. I'd been wheeled out past her, strapped to a gurney, IV in my arm, blood crusting on my face. And she hadn't looked at me. Not once. She'd whispered, "He didn't mean it." But the truth? She meant every second of it. In the early days, Thomas Grayson wore charm like a uniform. Pressed shirts, polished boots, and a smile that made neighbours lean in just a little closer when he spoke. He knew how to hold eye contact for exactly the right amount of time, how to nod at the right words, how to tell a story without making it sound like bragging. To everyone else, he wasn't just Evelyn's new companion. He was a dignified veteran, a man who had seen things and carried them quietly. He told war stories, but never the messy kind. Not the ones with blood and screaming. His were clean, tidy tales about camaraderie and courage, filled with just enough hardship to seem real, but not enough to make people uncomfortable. The kind of stories that made dinner guests lean in and say, "You should write a book." He never looked at me when he told them, but I always watched him. At first I thought he was just different. My father had been gentle, warm, steady like a lighthouse. Thomas was none of those things. He was sharp angles and clipped sentences, a man who moved through the house like he owned the air inside it. But he brought my mother lilies, the kind she used to grow in the garden before the weeds took over. He called her Evie, and she blushed like a schoolgirl. He bought me a teddy bear in camouflage with a tiny stitch name tag that read Cadet Claire. Everyone said how sweet that was. I hated that bear. It sat on my shelf like a sentinel watching, reminding me I'd been reassigned, retitled, claimed. Even at 10, I could feel it. That nothing he did was without intention. Neighbours adored him. At block parties, he helped set up tents, lifted heavy coolers, carried folding chairs with a grin. He never once let Evelyn speak for herself. If someone asked how she was, Thomas answered. If someone asked what she did these days, Thomas chuckled and said, "She takes care of me. Isn't that enough?" People laughed. Evelyn laughed too. But the laughter changed. Slowly, the brightness in her eyes dimmed. The lipstick she used to wear, deep red, always on Sundays, disappeared into the back of a drawer. Her long floral skirts were replaced with neutral slacks. She spoke less, smiled smaller. She stopped playing music while cooking, stopped humming in the morning. She started moving like her footsteps needed permission. At first, I thought it was just age or grief still lingering. But one night, I heard them through the wall. He wasn't yelling. Thomas never yelled, not when anyone could hear. His voice was low, sharp, surgical. He was criticising her handwriting on a grocery list. By morning, she'd rewritten it 3 times. From that point on, it was like watching a painting fade. One layer of Evelyn at a time disappeared, until all that remained was the outline of someone I barely recognised. He made her think it was her idea, the rules, the silence, the shrinking. Once, when I got home from school early, I saw him standing behind her in the kitchen, hands resting on her shoulders. It looked affectionate. But then he leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Evelyn flinched. I stood frozen in the doorway. She saw me, eyes wide, face pale, and then she smiled. Too fast, too forced. "Claire," she said, "did you finish your homework?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away. That night, I shoved the camouflage bear into the closet. That was the first time I admitted, if only to myself, that something was wrong. That this wasn't grief, that this wasn't love, this was ownership. I was 13 the first time I read her handwriting and didn't recognise it. It was a Saturday, late fall, the kind of day when the cold pressed through the windows, no matter how high you turned the heat. I had been cleaning out the hall closet, looking for an old scarf when I knocked over a box. Papers scattered, school files, faded recipes, yellowing receipts, and beneath them a small leather-bound notebook cracked at the spine. It wasn't labelled, just a plain brown cover, soft from years of handling. I flipped it open, expecting grocery lists or to-do reminders, but the first line stopped me cold. I only cry when he's asleep. I froze. The handwriting was hers, neat, slanted, still warm with youth, but undeniably Evelyn's. The entry was dated 1965. She would have been 13, my age. I sat down right there on the cold floor and kept reading. She wrote about her father, my grandfather, a man I'd only ever known through a single black and white photo in the living room. He wore a stiff uniform and a forced smile. Evelyn never spoke of him. I assumed he'd died young, maybe a war I'd never learned about, but in those pages he was alive and terrifying. Tonight he made me eat, standing up because I used too much butter on the toast. Mama stayed in the kitchen. She always stays in the kitchen. He said no one else would ever love me if I talked back again. I turned the page, then another and another. Her words bled with fear and confusion, but also with something more dangerous: acceptance. He says pain means he cares. He says it's my job to stay quiet so he doesn't have to get angry. Maybe this is love. Maybe love is supposed to hurt. By the time I reached the final entry, my hands were shaking. She'd been 16 when she wrote it. Mama left last week, packed a bag, said she couldn't take it, but I stayed. Someone has to keep the house in order. He needs me. I closed the notebook slowly, as if it might burst into flames. Everything I thought I understood about Evelyn collapsed in those pages. She hadn't just been hurt, she'd been shaped, moulded by a man who taught her that suffering was a form of loyalty. That staying silent was how you earned affection, that love, if it was real, demanded pain in return. It hit me like a blow, the way she looked at Thomas, the way she folded under his voice, the way she never fought back, not because she couldn't, but because somewhere deep inside she believed she shouldn't. Evelyn didn't see abuse. She saw duty. That was the twist in the knife. I'd always imagined her as a prisoner, as someone who'd lost herself under Thomas's control. But the truth was darker. She'd handed him the keys. Not because she liked the cage, but because it felt familiar. Generational trauma, I didn't know the term then, but I felt the weight of it, heavy, suffocating. I was just 13, sitting on a closet floor, clutching a secret that explained everything and solved nothing. I never brought it up. How could I? What would I say? Mum, I read your teenage diary, and now I understand why you let him break us. I buried the journal beneath my mattress and carried the truth like shrapnel, tiny pieces embedded so deep they only hurt when I breathed too hard. Years later, after Afghanistan, after the hospital, after Thomas was taken in cuffs, I found that same notebook in my duffel. I don't remember packing it, but I'd brought it with me, a reminder maybe of who she was and what she chose to be. High school was supposed to be the season of discovery, pep rallies, dance dates, dreams that didn't yet know the weight of reality. For me, it became a battlefield. By freshman year, the walls of our home no longer echoed with music or laughter. They breathed silence, tense, stale, the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl like the house itself was holding its breath. Thomas didn't need to raise his voice anymore. His presence was enough. His footsteps coming down the hall were my warning shot. The flicker in Evelyn's eyes was my signal to hide, but I had a plan. Not for escape, not yet, but for armour. That's when I found the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, JROTC. I joined it the first week of school, signing the form with a hand that barely stopped shaking. The recruiter smiled, probably thinking I was just another patriotic kid with delusions of grandeur. What he didn't know was that I wasn't trying to serve my country, I was trying to survive my house. The drills came first, marching in step, left, right, left, until the rhythm drowned out everything else. I fell in love with the structure. The commands were sharp, clean, no guessing, no second guessing. Orders made sense. Discipline wasn't punishment, it was control. And control was something I hadn't felt in years. I was up before sunrise, push-ups until my arms trembled, runs until my lungs begged me to quit. I pushed harder. The ache in my muscles felt honest. It was pain I chose, not the kind handed to me behind closed doors. That's where I met Lexi Adams. She was lean, fast-talking, never smiled unless she meant it. The kind of girl who saw through people like glass. First time we paired up during field drills, she raised an eyebrow and said, "You don't flinch when people shout. That's rare." I laughed. It was hollow. We became a unit, unofficially. She'd cover for me when I missed morning warm-ups, usually because Thomas had kept me up all night lecturing about responsibility, or because Evelyn had needed calming down after one of his mood swings. Lexi never asked questions outright. She observed. She noticed I never invited her over. She noticed the bruises I tried to explain away with gym class or clumsy excuses. One day, after a particularly grueling obstacle course, she sat beside me in the locker room and tossed a bottle of water my way. "You don't have to lie," she said. I froze. She didn't press. Just looked at me, unblinking, like she was offering something without strings. That's when I cracked. Not all at once, not with details, just enough for her to understand that my life outside school didn't match the straight A, perfectly pressed uniform version of me. She nodded once. From that moment, she became my safe zone, not a rescuer, not a therapist, just someone who knew and didn't run. Sometimes that's all survival needs. We'd meet behind the bleachers after school, share stories. Hers were chaotic but normal. Divorced parents, annoying brothers, homework stress. Mine were careful fragments, never names, never specifics, but enough. She started calling me soldier, half teasing, but her tone held respect. "You don't back down," she'd say, "even when it'd be easier." What she didn't know was that I wasn't brave. I was desperate. I started keeping a notebook, not a diary, too dangerous, if Thomas ever found it, but a training log. Miles run, sets completed, drill results. But between the lines, I recorded something else, my countdown. I had 3.5 years to escape, not to run away, but to rise above. West Point became the beacon, the dream, the only way out that didn't involve failure or shame. I researched their admissions like it was gospel, GPA requirements, physical fitness scores, recommendation letters. I mapped it all out like a mission. Failure wasn't an option. Evelyn noticed the change. "You've been awfully focused lately," she said one evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, textbooks and training manuals spread before me. "Just school," I replied without looking up. She nodded slowly. "Thomas says discipline is important. He thinks you're finally understanding your place." My stomach churned, but I smiled, because she needed that smile more than I needed the truth. In JROTC, I learned how to hold formation under pressure. At home, I learned how to hold silence under pain. Both were survival tactics. Both were killing me in slow motion. But they were getting me somewhere. Lexi once asked what I'd do once I got out. I didn't answer. Because the truth was I didn't know what freedom looked like. I just knew it had to be better than this. It was Lexi who finally said the words I'd been avoiding. "You need to report him." We were sitting under the metal bleachers after drill practice, the sun slanting gold through the gaps, our backs sticky with sweat and dirt. I remember how still the air felt, how quiet. Like the whole world had paused to listen. I didn't answer. She didn't look away. Claire, this isn't just discipline. This is abuse. I laughed, sharp and humourless. I can't just call the cops on my stepfather. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, she snapped. You're a minor. They'd have to listen. They'd have to do something. I shook my head. And then what? I go into foster care. He goes to jail. My mother loses everything. Lexi's jaw tightened. Your mother already lost herself. What are you trying to protect? The question cut deep. Deeper than I let her see. We didn't speak again for a few days. I buried myself in workouts, in drills, in studying for my next math test, like solving equations could somehow calculate a way out of my life. But Lexi didn't let it go. She started printing pamphlets from the school counsellor's office, highlighting numbers for Child Protective Services, drawing up sample statements I could give to a trusted adult. She even found a case study of a girl who'd successfully left an abusive home and was now living with extended family. She was ready to go to war for me, but I wasn't ready to let her. Then everything imploded. I don't know how Evelyn found out. Maybe someone overheard us. Maybe a teacher asked questions. Maybe Lexi's papers got left in a classroom. All I know is this. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd just finished my JROTC rifle cleaning assignment and was heading toward the parking lot when I saw her. Evelyn, my mother, standing by the flagpole in front of the school, her shawl tight around her shoulders despite the spring heat. Her eyes wild, her hands shaking. I slowed. My heart dropped into my stomach. Then she dropped to her knees, right there, in front of the whole damn school. Claire, please, she whispered, loud enough for me to hear, but soft enough that the teachers wouldn't catch it. Don't ruin our family. I stopped breathing. Whatever she told you, she said, nodding toward the school building like Lexi's spirit was haunting it. Whatever nonsense about police and child services, you can't. You'll destroy everything. People were watching now. Students, teachers. Nobody moved, but I felt every eye. She doesn't understand, Evelyn continued. Her voice cracked. She doesn't know what loyalty means, but you do, Claire. You're strong. You've always been strong. I stared at her, not knowing whether to scream or throw up, and then she said it. If you do this, I'll lose him, we'll lose him, and I'll never forgive you. The words hit like fists. Not Thomas, not the bruises, not the fear. Her, my mother. She wasn't begging me to save myself. She was begging me to stay silent. I turned and walked back into the building, not because I agreed, but because I didn't know how to survive losing her too. Lexi found me the next Monday. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. You chose her, she said. No, I said quietly. I chose survival. She nodded once, and then she was gone. 2 weeks later, she transferred schools, something about her mum getting a new job in another district. I never knew if that was true. But on my last day of sophomore year, I found a small envelope in my locker. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You weren't wrong, and you're not alone. I believe you. Always. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. I folded that note and tucked it into my wallet. It's still there, wrinkled, worn. Ink faded with time. Proof that someone once saw me and didn't look away. War taught me how to breathe again, not because it was kind, but because it was honest. The battlefield didn't lie. It didn't dress itself in flowers or whisper empty apologies. It screamed, it bled, it demanded everything and promised nothing, and that made it easier than home. I enlisted the moment I turned 18. No farewell party, no proud send-off. Evelyn barely looked up from her coffee when I left. Thomas didn't even bother pretending to care. He was probably glad. One less voice to challenge him, one less witness to his order. Basic training was brutal, that's the point. Strip you down, rebuild you from grit and bone and obedience. But I'd been trained by a different kind of drill sergeant, one with whiskey breath and backhand discipline. Nothing the army threw at me compared. I chose the medical track. Combat medic. I wanted to heal something, anything. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a way to prove that I could still protect others, even if I'd never been able to protect myself. Afghanistan was a blur of dust, blood, adrenaline, and exhaustion. The rules there were simple. Move fast, don't hesitate, keep pressure on the wound, keep your squad breathing. There was no room for tears, no time for second guessing. You learned quickly who you could count on. That's where I met Sergeant Brooke Miller. She was tough as steel and twice as sharp. A field medic like me, with hands steadier than most surgeons and a mouth that could cut through stone. On our first joint op, I watched her stitch a soldier's thigh with one hand while firing back with the other. No panic, just precision. "You freeze, you die," she said afterward, lighting a cigarette behind a blown-out Humvee. "You think, you die, you move, maybe you live." She became my anchor, my second skin. We didn't talk about home, we didn't need to. Her silence was permission. Mine was gratitude. Then came Captain Daniel Hayes, Special Forces. The type who didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. He had that presence, like he'd been carved out of the desert itself. Quiet strength, the kind that made you feel safe without even knowing why. He wasn't like the men I'd grown up around. There was no dominance in his leadership. No sharp corners, just resolve. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel something dangerously close to peace when he was around. Together, we made a strange kind of family. It wasn't built on blood or tradition. It was forged in chaos and trust. When your hands are inside a wounded man's chest and the person next to you keeps the enemy at bay, loyalty becomes sacred. Not demanded, earned. Some nights after long patrols, we'd sit in silence outside the tents, sharing canned beans and worse coffee, watching the stars. No one asked what we were thinking, but I knew they felt it too. For the first time since childhood, I didn't flinch at the sound of footsteps. I didn't brace for the slam of a door. War, for all its terror, gave me space to breathe. But even peace has shadows. One night, during a particularly brutal stretch near Helmand, I pulled a child out from under the rubble. He couldn't have been more than 7, covered in ash, crying. His mother's hand still clutching his shirt, severed at the wrist. I held him, carried him back to camp, cleaned his wounds with hands that had done it 1,000 times, but never like this. Brooke sat beside me later and didn't say a word, just passed me a flask. I didn't drink, but I held it, needed the weight. War didn't just take lives. It took the parts of you didn't know were still breakable. But in that breaking, something else grew. Strength that wasn't forged by fear. Compassion that didn't need permission. Connection without contracts. For the first time, I had people who chose me, not because they needed something, but because they saw me and stayed. And I clung to that like a lifeline, because even in the desert, I knew the war waiting back home wasn't done with me yet. It was a little past midnight when the satellite phone rang. I was sitting on a crate outside the medic tent, wrapping gauze around my fingers, the sting of antiseptic biting into fresh cuts. The desert was quiet that night, unusually still. just the low hum of generators in the distance, and the whisper of dry wind pushing sand across the camp's edge. The phone rang again. Only a handful of people had the number. My chest tightened as I reached for it. Brooke looked over from her cot, raising an eyebrow. I nodded once and stepped out. "Hello?" Silence, then breathing, shaky, uneven, female. "Claire?" the voice whispered, barely audible over static. My spine straightened. I knew that voice. I knew the tremble in it better than my own reflection. "Mum?" More silence, then a sob. I don't have long. I'm at a payphone. He broke the house line. Said if you try to call again, he'll..." Her breath caught, choked off like someone was squeezing her throat from miles away. "What did he say, Mom?" I asked, voice low, steady, already preparing myself for the worst. "He said he'll come for you, said you're not safe, not even there." My pulse slammed in my ears. I turned my back to the tent, shielding the call from any wandering ears. "Okay, listen, you have to get out of there. I'll contact the base. We'll get clearance. There's a program for military families, safe houses. We'll fly you here, no questions. You'll be safe with me." Her reply wasn't what I expected. No. Just one word. Flat. Final. "Mum, I'm serious. We can protect you." "No, baby," she said, and now her voice broke for real. "You don't understand. He always finds us. Always. You think I haven't tried before? You think this is the first time?" That admission knocked the breath out of me. "What?" "I tried once. Years ago. Packed a bag, took the car, got to a motel 2 counties over. He found me within 12 hours. I gripped the edge of the crate to stay upright. "Then come farther," I pleaded. "Come to me. We'll get you overseas clearance. I'll make it happen." Another pause. Then came the sound I hadn't heard since childhood. My mother crying. Real crying. Not the silent, controlled weeping she'd mastered over the years. This was raw, broken, and real. "I'm so tired, Claire, so tired of being hunted in my own house. But if I run, he'll take it out on you. I've seen the look in his eyes. He blames you for everything now. The whispers, the stares from neighbours, the tension at work. He says it's your fault for leaving, for not coming home, for sending those brochures." I remembered those brochures. I'd mailed them 6 months ago. Pamphlets from the base's family support centre. Hotlines. Resources. I'd thought it was a small step, a start. It had become a spark in a dry forest. "I sent those to help you," I said, my voice sharp with disbelief. "I know," she whispered. "But he took them as an attack." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "So what? You're just going to stay, let him control you, hurt you?" Another beat of silence, then. "I'm not calling for me." "What?" "I'm calling for you, to warn you, so you can hide, so you're ready, because if he does come..." "I don't think he'll stop this time." My stomach twisted. "You're not calling for help?" "No." "You're not asking me to save you?" "No." "Then why?" Her answer was soft. "Because I need you to live, Claire, even if I don't." A part of me shattered. She didn't want saving. She wanted absolution, permission to drown as long as I swam. And suddenly I saw it clearly, not through the lens of childhood loyalty or the fog of pity, but with brutal, blinding clarity. She wasn't trapped. She was choosing this. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with joy, but with certainty. She had built her identity around suffering, around survival in place, not escape. She didn't want out. She wanted the pain she knew over the uncertainty she didn't. "Mum," I whispered, but the line was already dead. Just like that, the desert was silent again. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone like it might ring again. It didn't. When I returned to the tent, Brooke didn't ask questions. Just looked up and handed me her half-empty canteen. Bad news? I nodded. Worse than usual? I nodded again. She didn't say another word. That night I didn't sleep because I realized something that hurt more than any wound I'd treated, more than any broken bone or battlefield trauma. My mother wasn't lost. She had already decided she didn't want to be found. Coming home didn't feel like coming home at all. The air was colder than I remembered, sharper somehow, or maybe I was different. After months of dust and adrenaline, the calm of North Carolina felt suffocating. There was no smoke, no sirens, no gunfire, just stillness and the unshakable sense that something was wrong. I checked into base housing and reported for reassignment, but my real mission started the next day. I went straight to the Judge Advocate General's office. Major Spencer Wells was assigned to my case. A tall man with grey hair and a gaze that cut through the formalities. He didn't ask why I was there, just gestured for me to sit and said, "Start at the beginning." So I did. I told him about the late night call, the threats, the years of silence, about Thomas, about Evelyn, about the bruises I never reported, the files I never filed. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "We'll open an inquiry immediately. But be aware, he's a civilian. Our reach is limited unless we catch him crossing jurisdiction. That said, we have options." It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever had before. I left with a folder of paperwork, a list of emergency contacts, and the first flicker of a plan. Step 1, get Evelyn out. I wasn't naive, I knew she'd resist. But the idea of doing nothing, of letting her stay in that house with a man who had threatened both of us, was unbearable. I coordinated with the base family protection unit. Found a safe house 3 towns over, secured transportation. I even arranged a counselling intake for her through the military spouse network, hoping familiarity would feel less like charity. I didn't tell her the details at first, just called and asked to meet. She agreed. That alone felt like progress. We met at a small coffee shop near the edge of town. Neutral ground. She looked older, frailer, like the colour had been drained from her skin and replaced with something greyer, more fragile. But her eyes still held that wary glint, like a soldier scanning for landmines. She didn't hug me. We sat across from each other, coffee untouched between us. "I found a place," I said, gently. "You'd be safe. They can help." She stared at the table. "He'll find me." "No," I said firmly. "We'll make sure he doesn't." Silence. "Please, Mom," I whispered. "Let me help you." She looked up, and for a split second I thought she might say yes. But she didn't. Instead, she pushed back her chair and stood. "I need to think." She left without saying goodbye. That night I waited. I had the car ready, the safe house prepped. I didn't sleep. By morning I knew something was wrong. I drove to the house, knocked, rang. Nothing. The door was locked, curtains drawn, the mailbox overflowing. I went around to the back window and peered inside. Empty. Not ransacked. Not looted. Just gone. The furniture still there, but no clothes, no shoes, no signs of life. And on the kitchen table, propped against a bowl of fruit, was a single envelope, my name on the front. I opened it with numb fingers. "Claire," it read, "I can't leave. I thought I could, but I can't. You don't understand what it means to stay, to hold a family together when it's breaking. Sometimes it's not about escape. It's about loyalty. I was raised to believe family is everything. That belief has kept me alive. I know you don't agree, but this is my choice. Please don't come looking for me. Let me go. Mom, no goodbye, no love, just resignation." I folded the letter and stood in the empty kitchen, heart sinking. She hadn't been taken. She had walked away. From freedom. From me. I thought the war was over. After Evelyn's letter, after finding the house hollow and her voice silent, I'd assumed the worst had already happened. That her choosing him, again, was the final blow. That the betrayal had reached its limit. I was wrong. 3 nights later, I returned to my quarters just after 2200. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that should have calmed me, but didn't. I felt it first in the air, that thick, unnatural stillness, like something was holding its breath. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. He was already there, Thomas Grayson, sitting calmly in the dark, his silhouette outlined by the glow of the street lamp outside, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded neatly in his lap. Like he owned the room. Like he'd been waiting. "Long day, soldier?" he said. My heart didn't just skip. It crashed against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. "How the hell did you get on base?" I snapped, backing toward the door, reaching instinctively for the panic button near the wall, but I never made it. A hand reached out from behind and slammed the door shut. Evelyn. She looked different in the dim light, not just older, smaller. Like all her edges had been sanded down, she clutched something tight to her chest, something soft, familiar. It was the blanket from my childhood, the one with faded stars and frayed edges, the one I used to drag around the house before I learned to walk without falling. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. My voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes flicked to Thomas, then back to me. She didn't answer. He stood, slowly, with the casual menace of someone who knew he still had control. "You think paperwork can stop me?" he said, stepping closer. "You think safe houses and support groups can protect you? You belong to this family, Claire. And family doesn't walk away." "I'm not part of your family," I spat. He smiled, cold, clinical. "She brought you back." I looked at Evelyn again, at the blanket in her arms, at the way she held it out now, like an offering, like a trade. "Stop," I whispered, suddenly unable to breathe. "Please don't." "She just wants things to be right again," Thomas said, "to bring her daughter home." But this wasn't home. This was a surrender. My mother, the woman who once tucked that same blanket around me during thunderstorms, was now using it to tether me back to the man who hurt us both, not as a shield, but as a leash. "You didn't just leave me," I whispered. "You handed me over." Evelyn's lips trembled. For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Shame? Regret? I don't know. But she didn't deny it. "I'm tired, Claire," she said. "Tired of running, tired of the whispers, tired of fighting battles I can't win. If you just come home, maybe it'll stop." "Stop?" My voice rose. "He nearly killed me. You watched him do it. And now you think, what? That if I just agree to be quiet again, everything resets." She looked away. Thomas stepped forward again, his breath hot with disdain. "You think they'll protect you? The military? The law? They're bureaucrats. They lose paperwork. They ignore phone calls. But me? I don't lose track of what's mine." And then I moved. Not out of fear, out of clarity. I slammed the panic button behind the coat rack. The alarm screamed to life, echoing through the building. Within seconds, boots pounded the hallway, yells, orders, the sound of metal and command. Thomas lunged, but I dodged him. This wasn't war, it was training. I knew how to move, how to fall without breaking, how to stall until backup arrived. MPs burst through the door, weapons drawn. Thomas resisted, fought, tried to scream about lies and conspiracies, but this time no one listened. They cuffed him, dragged him out, kicking and cursing. Evelyn didn't move. Even as they pulled him away, she stood frozen, still holding the blanket, arms shaking. "You didn't have to press it," she said quietly. "You could have just come with us." I stared at her, the truth sinking like lead. "I did come home," I said, "just not to you." The first thing I remember after the chaos was the pain. A sharp, throbbing fire that radiated through my shoulder and ribs, pulsing in time with the beeping monitor beside my head. I blinked against the two bright hospital lights, my body heavy, swollen with bruises, adrenaline long gone. And then, voices. Familiar, grounding. Daniel stood to my left, his posture stiff but his eyes frantic, the kind of worry he rarely let show. Brooke was on my right, arms crossed, face pale with fury. She wasn't bothering to hide. She looked like she could kill someone with her stare alone. "You're awake," Daniel said, voice cracking. "Feels like I got hit by a truck," I rasped. He tried to smile, failed. "Thomas is in custody," Brooke said. "They've got him locked up tight. No bail this time." I tried to nod, winced. Good. But I knew better than to think it was over. A few hours later, Major Spencer Wells appeared at the foot of my hospital bed, a thick file under his arm. He looked tired, worn but determined. "You've stirred up quite the storm, Captain Morgan," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realise telling the truth caused weather events." He didn't laugh, just opened the folder. We started pulling every record connected to Thomas Grayson, medical, military, civil, and we found a lot. He handed me several sheets, police reports, statements, 2 different ex-wives, 2 different counties, similar stories, intimidation, control, threats, emotional abuse, suspected physical violence. Neither case made it to court. "Why?" I asked. Wells tapped the last page. "Because your mother provided testimony for both, claimed the women were unstable, that Thomas was the real victim." My stomach turned. "Evelyn," he nodded. "In both instances, she called their employers, discredited their character, even claimed one had a drinking problem. She wasn't just complicit. She was an active shield." I felt the room tilt, as if gravity had changed direction. My mind reeled, trying to catch up with what my gut already knew. "She protected him," I whispered. "For years," Wells confirmed. "And now we believe she attempted to mislead base security by posing as your legal next of kin, claimed the situation was a misunderstanding, and tried to halt our internal investigation before it even started." I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the flood of betrayal. Again and again, she'd chosen him, not just in silence, but in strategy. She weaponized loyalty, I said, voice shaking, made it look like devotion when it was defense. Brooke cursed under her breath. "So what now?" Wells folded his hands. "We're moving forward. Charges are being formalized. Military prosecutors are coordinating with civilian DA. We'll need your full statement. And any other documentation, emails, call logs, anything that connects him to the threats." "I kept everything," I said. "Even the voicemail." He nodded. "Good, because this time we're not letting it slide." The next few days passed in a blur of interviews, transcripts, and signatures. My body healed slowly, bruises yellowed, stitches pulled, bones ached, but my mind burned with clarity. Every piece of evidence felt like a piece of me being rebuilt. Daniel rarely left my side. He brought coffee that tasted like gasoline, but I drank it anyway. Brooke handled logistics, chasing down phone records and old testimonies with the precision of a seasoned officer. Together, they held me steady. One night, as rain tapped against the hospital windows, I asked Daniel, "Do you think she ever loved me?" He didn't rush to answer, just squeezed my hand. "I think she loved who she wanted you to be, not who you really are. I nodded. That night I didn't cry, not because I wasn't heartbroken, but because the grief had settled into something colder, sharper, more useful. Truth didn't heal like a balm. It cut like a scalpel, and sometimes cutting was the only way to remove the rot. The courtroom smelled like disinfectant and old paper. Cold, sterile, lifeless, nothing like a battlefield, and yet the tension pressed against my skin in the same way, tight, electric, suffocating. Thomas Grayson sat at the defendant's table in a perfectly tailored suit, back straight, expression composed. You'd never know he'd once slammed his fists into my ribs or whispered death threats through gritted teeth. His lawyers had polished him well. He looked like a retired officer, not a monster. I sat on the other side of the room, flanked by Daniel and Brooke, both in uniform, both stone-faced. I could feel their presence like armour, but even they couldn't stop the shaking in my hands. Then the bailiff called a name I didn't expect. Evelyn Morgan, please approach the stand. My heart stuttered. She walked in slowly, wearing a pale blue sweater, hair neatly pulled back. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, fragile. Her hands trembled as she was sworn in. The prosecutor asked the question softly. Mrs. Morgan, do you understand why you're here? She nodded. Do you wish to provide testimony regarding the events involving your daughter and the defendant, Mr. Grayson? Another nod, and then she spoke, clear, steady, almost rehearsed. He hurt her, she said, my husband, he hurt my daughter, and I let it happen. The room went still, even Thomas blinked. I thought I was protecting something, Evelyn continued. Our family, our reputation. But all I did was protect a lie. I let him control me for so long. I started believing that pain was just another form of love. But it's not. It never was. She looked at me then, for the first time in what felt like years. She really looked at me. I'm sorry, Claire, she said. I should have stopped him. I should have saved you, but I was too afraid. My lungs refused to work. She turned back to the judge. Everything she said is true, and more. I have journals, letters, records I never gave up. I'm ready to give them now. I didn't cry, I couldn't, because some part of me had gone numb. Evelyn's statement changed everything. The judge granted a recess. Prosecutors reviewed the new evidence. Thomas's defence team panicked, tried to push for a plea, It was too late, and when the verdict was read, I didn't flinch. Guilty, 20 years, no parole, dishonourable discharge, all military honours revoked. Thomas didn't shout, didn't snarl. He just stared forward, jaw tight, eyes glassy, with rage he could no longer weaponise. Justice. But it didn't feel like victory. After the ruling, I found myself in the courthouse bathroom, washing my face with cold water, trying to come back into my body. My skin felt foreign, my reflection unfamiliar. That's when I heard it. A sob. Low, ragged, like something breaking from the inside. I turned slowly, heart already bracing. It was Evelyn. She sat on the tiled floor of the handicap stall, the door wide open, her arms wrapped around a picture frame. I stepped closer and saw it, Thomas, in uniform, smiling, probably from their wedding day. She rocked back and forth, clutching the frame like it was the last solid thing in her world. I did the right thing, she whispered over and over. I did the right thing. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? She looked up at me with hollow eyes. He was all I had left. He tried to kill me, I said, my voice quiet but shaking. I know, she sobbed, and I loved him anyway. There was no fury in me then, no more begging her to choose me. That part of me had died long ago. I turned and walked out. 10 minutes later, the scream echoed down the corridor. By the time security got in, it was too late. Evelyn had taken pills, enough to silence everything. The photo still clutched in her arms. I stood outside the bathroom as the medics wheeled her out. Brooke grabbed my arm, trying to steady me. Daniel whispered, "Don't go in." I didn't, because I already knew. My mother had finally chosen something. Not me, not him. Silence. And in that silence I realised some wars don't end with justice. They end with grief. Grief didn't come in waves. It came like fog, thick, constant, suffocating. After Evelyn's funeral, there were no long lines of mourners, no heartfelt speeches, just a small room, a closed casket, and a few people from her church who barely knew her outside Sunday services. I stood in the back, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know where else to stand. I didn't cry. I felt hollow, not from the loss of her life, but from the slow erosion of what she could have been. She hadn't just disappeared when she took those pills. She had been disappearing for years. Every time she looked away, every time she chose Thomas, every time she called pain love. For a long time after, I disappeared too. Not physically, I returned to base, went through the motions, fulfilled the paperwork, but I was sleepwalking through life, moving like a soldier in enemy territory, uncertain if the next step would detonate something inside me. Then, one morning, I found a folded note tucked into my locker. It was from Brooke. "You survived hell, that's not nothing, but survival isn't where the story ends, Claire. It's where it begins. Let's build something." And just like that, something inside me stirred. We started meeting on weekends, just the three of us, Brooke, Daniel and me. At first, it was informal. Conversations, notes, lists of names we remembered, soldiers, spouses, civilians, people we'd met over the years who had hinted at violence behind closed doors, who had flinched when certain words were said, who had smiled too tightly when they spoke about home. Then we gave it a name, Valor Shield, a space, a network, a lifeline. Brooke handled the logistics, securing space on base, navigating the red tape, getting the brass to sign off without watering down the mission. Daniel ran operations, built the intake system, set up secure channels, made sure every file was protected, and every call was returned. And I told my story, first in small rooms, then bigger ones. Women came forward, men too, young cadets, retired officers, wives, husbands, parents. They came with bruises you couldn't see, wounds they'd carried in silence for years. And every time I stood before them, I said the same thing. Silence never protected me. It only buried me deeper. Speaking out didn't just save me, it brought me back to life. I didn't sugarcoat the pain. I told them about the night in my quarters when Thomas tried to finish what years of fear had started. I told them about the courtroom, about the look in my mother's eyes, about the sound of her body being wheeled out under a sheet. I told them that healing wasn't linear and justice wasn't clean. But I also told them what survived, me. Not just the uniform or the scars or the titles, me whole. Still broken in places, yes, but walking forward anyway. Valor Shield grew fast, faster than we expected. Within a year, we had satellite teams on other bases, counsellors, lawyers, medical volunteers. We built a system where none had existed, where whispers were replaced by voices, where isolation was met with connection. One day, after a session at Fort Bragg, a young recruit approached me. She couldn't have been older than 19, shaking, eyes red. "My mum is still with him," she said, "but I'm not." She handed me a patch, her JROTC insignia. "You reminded me that I can build something different." I held that patch in my palm for a long time after she left. Lexi's words echoed in my mind. I believe you. Always. Now it was my turn to believe in someone else. Sometimes I visit the edge of the base where we planted the Valor Shield garden. Just a small patch of earth with a single stone marker. No names, no dedications, just a quote carved into the granite. Truth doesn't end pain, it ends silence, and that's where healing begins. I sit there when the weight returns, when anniversaries creep up or shadows stretch too long. Daniel sits with me sometimes, Brooke too. We don't talk, we don't need to. We survived. Not just the war in the desert, but the war inside the walls we once called home. The house hadn't changed much. The paint on the porch was still chipped. The gutters still sagged on the south side. Even the front step creaked the same way it did when I was a kid, sneaking in after curfew. For a moment, standing at the edge of the walkway, I felt like I had stepped into a memory. But this time, the power was mine. No one had lived there since Evelyn's passing. The house had sat quiet, unclaimed. I hadn't been back since the night of the confrontation, when she stood at my door with that blanket in her arms and a plea in her eyes. I had vowed never to return, but grief has a way of pulling you in strange directions. I didn't bring anyone with me. No Daniel, no Brooke, just me, a set of old keys, and the weight of closure. The door groaned open, and the scent of dust and old wood hit me like a wave. It was stale, but familiar. Like time itself had been sitting here waiting. I walked through slowly. The living room still held the same brown couch, the same coffee table with the one leg that had always been wobbly. The photos were gone, removed by whoever handled the estate. But I didn't need pictures to remember what happened here. The hallway stretched long and narrow, just like I remembered. The floor creaked under my boots, each step a resurrection of buried sounds. I passed my old bedroom, the door still slightly ajar. I didn't go in. Instead, I opened the hall closet. The top shelf was mostly empty, but tucked in the far corner, half covered in an old towel, was what I'd come for, the bear. The same one Thomas had given me the day he moved in. Camouflage, patterned, stiff with time, one of the button eyes hanging by a thread, its stitch tag still read Cadet Claire. I pulled it down and stared at it for a long time. How many nights had it watched me from the shelf? How many times had I clutched it in confusion, mistaking its presence for comfort? It hadn't protected me. It had witnessed, silently, always. I took it outside to the backyard. The grass was overgrown, the swing set rusted. But the fire pit was still there, bricks arranged in a crooked circle, blackened from old cookouts and colder nights. I set the bear in the centre, then I lit the match. The flame started slow, licking at the edges of the fabric. Then it spread, consuming the stuffing, curling the tag, warping the stitched eyes until they were nothing but melted plastic. The smoke rose in thin grey ribbons. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just breathed, deep, steady, present, because this wasn't vengeance. It wasn't anger, it was release. The bear had once symbolised everything I thought love was supposed to look like. Obedience, silence, pretty packaging hiding the bruise beneath. I had clung to it like a lifeline when, in truth, it had always been a chain. Now it was ash. I stayed until the fire died down, until the last ember faded, until the night air cooled the heat off my skin. And then, for the first time in my life, I stepped away from that house. Not running, not breaking, not afraid. I had come back not to be reclaimed, but to claim myself. I don't remember what song played in the car on the way back. I don't remember if the sky was cloudy or clear. What I do remember is the feeling Lightness, not joy, not peace, but something close. Not because someone had rescued me, not because the war was over, but because I had finally understood. I was never truly abandoned. I had simply stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing myself.